Okay. So welcome. Thank you everyone for joining tonight's panel. At Neighborhood Villages, we believe that everyone deserves access to affordable, high-quality childcare, and we advocate for big structural change to policy, and we architect innovative, scalable solutions to the biggest problems facing providers and the families who rely on them. So tonight, we're very proud to be presenting tonight's panel in partnership with Community Education Commission Detroit and Neighbor Schools, two fierce, wonderful partners in this big, talented, inspiring childcare movement that we feel proud to be a part of. My name's Sarah Muncie. I'm the co-founder of Neighborhood Villages, and I'm so happy that over 150 educators have signed up for tonight's discussion. Early educators from all over the country are joining us tonight in this space designed just for you. You have been on the front line since the early days of the pandemic. Without most of the supports and services and coordination that has gone into this very long debate about whether or not and when to reopen K-12 schools. And we stand absolutely in awe of the amazing work that you've done and that you continue to do. And so before we go any further, we just want to say thank you. As vaccines have become available to early educators from around the country, we've aimed to create a space where trusted doctors can tell us more about the vaccine and answer our questions. Please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. And we will do our best to get them answered. The doctors this evening will be answering questions surrounding the science of the vaccine, but not the logistics of how to get yourself a vaccine. We have folks from all over, and that's going to differ state to state and city to city. Tonight, we are joined by two brilliant, kind, incredible doctors. We are so proud that they're here. They are like the smartest of the smarties. So I'm very proud to introduce them. Dr. Kathy Schue is the medical director for the Division of STD Prevention and HIV/AIDS Surveillance at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the director of medical education for the MD-PH Bureau of Infectious Disease and Lab Sciences. She has served as the designated physician epidemiologist for child care and multi-system inflammatory syndrome for the Massachusetts COVID response. She's also an associate professor of pediatrics and attending physician in pediatric infectious disease at Boston University Medical Center. Dr. Schue graduated from Brown University of Medicine in 1995, completed pediatric residency at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in 98, and completed fellowship in pediatric infectious diseases at the BU Medical Center in 2001. She also completed a second STD prevention fellowship jointly sponsored by the Association of Teachers of Preventative Medicine and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and received her master's in public health and epidemiology from the BU School of Public Health. Dr. Laulu Fayanju is the regional medical director for Oak Street Health in Ohio. Oak Street is a network of primary care physicians for older adults. Dr. Fayanju led the company's expansion to Cleveland, where since 2018, centers have opened in Cleveland's Glenville, West Boulevard, Lee Miles, and Morgana Park neighborhoods, as well as in Youngstown, Ohio. Dr. Fayanju holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in health policy and management from Harvard University. Dr. Fayanju earned his medical degree from Tufts University in Boston and completed his residency at the Joint Family Medicine residency at Loyola University and the Cook County Health and Hospital System in Chicago, where he was chief resident. Dr. Fayanju grew up in New Jersey, and he's married with 2 children, and he loves spending time outside with his family and cooking, and he is an avid film and music lover. So to begin, Dr. Fayanju will take us through, will start us off on a little overview of the vaccine. And Dr. Schue and Dr. Fayanju will be presenting together tonight. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Fayanju.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate that. And I want to thank all of the participants and everyone on this call today, especially our early educators. Thank you. You know, heroism has, I think we've had a really wonderful opportunity to see heroism. And I think that our early childhood educators have been heroes in keeping our children whole and mentally sound through this very trying time. So I want to thank each and every one of you. And we stand shoulder to shoulder with you and supportive of you. I hope tonight to spend some time just kind of going through how the vaccine is developed, how it works, and just kind of explain how, from my perspective as a family physician, how I explain this vaccine to my patients, my friends, and my family. So I think if we can, we'd like to share the screen now, the slide, or should I do that on my end? What would be best,
Just a
Sarah?
second. Yep, we're sharing that. Yes, I'll share that just a moment.
Okay. So while we're waiting to get the screen up, I just, the vaccine has been, ever since the first cases of the COVID virus, the SARS-CoV-2 novel coronavirus was identified late in 2019. Scientists and doctors all over the world have been working very hard to identify the genetic structure and the structure of this virus so that we would be able to develop a vaccine. One of the leaders of that effort is a young doctor, Dr. Kesmenkia Corbett. She is a scientist at the National Institutes of Health, and she has been working on helping us understand the unique nature of this particular virus so that we could find vulnerabilities and would be able to neutralize it with a vaccine. She has been such an influential voice in helping help bring down vaccine hesitancy. She was actually recently spoke with Pastor T.D. Jakes, who runs a very large mega church in Texas, and through her advocacy and her explanations of how the vaccines work to him, she turned him from a vaccine skeptic around COVID to a vaccine adherent, and he opened up his mega church to become a vaccine center down in Texas. So she's not only a gifted scientist, but also an advocate for all of us and for our patients. So we owe her a tremendous debt. As she said during, I will just say, as she said in a recent lecture, I like to call it the plug and play approach. But the basic idea is that we had so much knowledge based on previously done work by ourselves and other labs that we were able to pull the trigger on vaccine development and start the ball rolling towards a phase 1 clinical trial. And she says this really to point out the fact that the vaccine development, while rapid, has been the product and the beneficiary of years of research and development. Another important person in this discussion is Lisa Cooper. She serves as on the Data Safety and Monitoring Board of the vaccine trials, and she shared this quote: we also need to focus on frontline workers and low-wage workers that understand their needs, providing protective equipment, safe spaces to work, paid sick leave, hazard pay, or health insurance and access to testing and care. And we need to provide for people's basic needs: stable housing, food security, digital access to education and healthcare. And I think this quote is so important from Dr. Cooper because it puts in broader perspective that the vaccine is just one of a much larger public health effort that we need to be a part of. The vaccine is an offensive weapon to fight the to fight the virus in our bodies, but defensive measures like mask wearing, like adequate PPE, like social distancing, and making sure that our schools and our educational facilities can operate safely is all part of how we're going to get to a safer place and a more normal place. In addition, the Food and Drug Administration convened a vaccines and biological products advisory committee and added 5 temporary members. They pulled this group from some of the top experts in virology and infectious disease, immunology, and biostatistics around the country. And what's really striking about this group not only are they incredibly well credentialed and knowledgeable, but the diversity of this group, I think, is something that cannot be understated. We know that medicine has traditionally been very male dominated. We know that it's also been predominantly dominated by non-people of color and non-minority groups. And to see this diverse group of leaders be part of this advocacy, who are using their credibility and their platform to make sure that this vaccine is safe for everyone, and that rigor and safety are at the heart of this, is really, really great to see. So let's talk about the vaccines and how our current vaccines differ from conventional vaccines. So as you can see on this slide, we've got four panels here, if you guys can see that all clearly. The vaccines, there are 3 vaccines that are currently available for use in the United States. Moderna and Pfizer are 2 what we call mRNA vaccines, and Johnson & Johnson, in conjunction with a pharmaceutical company called Janssen, have developed a adenovirus vaccine. These 2 vaccines, they differ in significant ways, but the point is that they both help develop a strong immune response in patients to enable us to be able to develop immunity. If you go to the next slide, we can kind of go through how this works. Now, for the mRNA vaccines, scientists developed a vaccine that would use mRNA. That's messenger ribonucleic acid. Messenger ribonucleic acid is not material that can infiltrate or become embedded in your existing DNA or in your genome. But instead, as I describe it to patients, I think of it kind of like a Post-it note that we send into our body. Now we put that Post-it note into our body encased in a fat coat, a lipid coat, and it's injected into the body, and then it infiltrates a cell membrane. While in the cell membrane, that mRNA is delivered to the protein-making centers of our cells, or our ribosomes. And those ribosomes then are told by this mRNA to make a specific protein called a spike protein. As you can see, spike proteins are found on the surface of the coronavirus. They actually don't cause an infection, but they are a structure unique to the coronavirus, unique enough for us to use as a target for creating an immune response. So once the body creates this spike protein on its own, separate from actually being exposed to an actual virus, our immune cells recognize it, chew it up, and after recognizing that this is not something we ever want to have in our bodies, create antibodies to the spike protein. So when or if someone should encounter an actual coronavirus in the wild, so for lack of a better term, their bodies will recognize spike protein because it's on the surface of the coronavirus, neutralizing the virus before it can induce a serious infection. So that's kind of the way all these vaccines work. It's all about teaching the immune system how to make a non-infectious component of the virus to ensure that our bodies can develop an immune response. Okay. Now, what we're seeing here from this is that after initial vaccination, several days following the initial vaccination, our bodies begin to develop those antibodies, and we can measure those in our bodies. We then give a second dose either 21 days or 28 days after that initial dose, depending on which medicine that you're taking. For the Pfizer vaccine, it's 21 days. For the Moderna vaccine, it's 28 days. And at that point, you get a second booster, which then takes the immune response up a notch and brings the antibody titer levels to a higher level. So that helps the body once we get those titers on board, the antibodies are built up, and then we can have immunity from the virus. What's been very impressive about this is that COVID cases in the group that when we have studied both Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine in groups, we've noted that folks who get vaccinated have a substantially lower incident rate of getting the COVID virus infection. As you can see on the panel on the left, patients who were administered the Moderna vaccine, that gap between that blue line and that pink line shows you that difference, which is almost 2.5 times the difference in infection rates. That's incredible. That is a really, really, really good response. And a similarly positive response can be seen with the Pfizer vaccine as well, which you can see there on the right-hand panel. So as you go to the next slide, the biggest difference between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, this kind of lays it out. Both trials had about 30,000, 35,000 participants. The Pfizer vaccine had participants starting from the age of 16, and the Moderna vaccine had patients who were 18 years and older. Both are highly effective, 95% and 94.5% effective for both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine was initially believed to be requiring ultra cold storage, but over the last several weeks, Pfizer and the Food and Drug Administration in conjunction with the CDC has determined that those vaccines can actually be stored in more conventional storage and freezers, which is great, which means that we now have more options in the general public. Moderna can be stored in a regular refrigerator, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine can also be stored in a regular refrigerator as well. No one tool is going to help us get through this pandemic. We still have to do all the good public health mitigation steps. We got to wash our hands. We've got to socially distance. We have to wear a mask. And ultimately, we all have to get vaccinated. We will really be able to turn the corner on this terrible time in our history as a society once we're able to do all of these things in a concerted and consistent way. So I'll stop there and hand it back to Sarah, who I think will then hand it off to Dr. Schue.
Yeah, so Dr. Schue, I'll hand it to you. And thanks for continuing the conversation. Thank you, Dr. Fayanju.
Great. Thanks to all of you, and thanks for the invitation. It's great to be back with this group. Many of you may remember that I started this journey with Massachusetts Child Care Center directors, Massachusetts EEC, the family child care owners, and the frontline staff back in July when I was announced as the physician epidemiologist on the front lines with all of you to answer your health and science questions related to this. So the most incredible thing to me is that less than a year later, we're actually able to talk about a preventative like the vaccine and the science behind it because of the fact that so many people, my colleagues, have poured 24/7 work hours into the development and really sped things up through sweat equity put into it. Taking advantage of the previous science, yes, but also taking advantage of the fact that the federal government was willing to fund this vaccine and advance its production a little faster, even without the trial results. Part of the ways in which we gained extra time and got the vaccine out to frontline people and workers faster was simply because some of the risks that pharmaceutical companies have to take to make these vaccines, some of those gambles in terms of money up front were instead funded by the federal government. So there were no shortcuts taken in any of the science or the production process, which we want to be so sterile, so perfect in the factories that manufacture these vaccines, that the point is made that there's to ramp up production safely and quickly is important. But at the same time, the rate limiting factor for vaccination right now is really the fact that there isn't enough vaccine being produced quickly enough because the factories need to ramp up safely, really safely. So there will eventually be enough vaccine. It's happening in real time surrounding us. I'll point out one other odd thing I think many of you on the front lines know that I got snagged into this because one secretary spoke to another secretary in Massachusetts and they were like, we need help with EEC. They need somebody from DPH who understands childcare. And they pointed at me, the pediatrician in the group, who normally does STD stuff, which is why none of you had ever heard of me before. And that's great. But part of this vaccine journey brings me back to my roots as a pediatric infectious disease fellow. I cut my teeth on monitoring the downturn in pneumococcal infections, invasive pneumococcal infections. My mentors were people who were behind the development and safety monitoring of the initial vaccines that were used to prevent pneumonias and meningitis that were developed, over 2 decades ago now. So I actually started my career in epidemiology related to vaccine preventable diseases, and it's great to have done this ride with all of you related to this as well. So we are simply going to walk through a number of available resources that I want you all to be aware of. Many times I've spoken to you about the fact that we have felt all along that we are fighting more than one pandemic. We are fighting the pandemic of COVID infections. We are fighting SARS-CoV-2. It's a war against this tiny, tiny viral pathogen, right? But at the same time, we're also fighting the pandemic of fear and misinformation. And to make sure that all of you are using the same websites that we all use for information purposes is so important, so that the myths can get busted quickly and that misinformation doesn't travel more quickly than accurate information can. So what I'm going to be doing throughout today's Q&A session is showcasing where I go for information in real time when I'm helping to answer your questions, and also hoping to drive the way your searches drive you to accurate information as well. Okay, so let's see. Sarah, is it okay if I share a screen?
Yes, absolutely. Do you have sharing capacity right now?
I do, I think.
Perfect.
All right. Can you guys see something that says myths and facts about COVID vaccines?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Terrific. I'm actually going to back it up. What I did was I did a Google search. I asked Dr. Google, CDC, COVID vaccine FAQs. First hit, frequently asked questions, leads me to a website that contains a number of things. I'll show you some of the FAQs. But what I'm more interested in right now is showcasing the key things to know and pointing out that a lot of the things that Dr. Fayanju already talked about include the fact that vaccine is one piece of what you already all know how to do. On the front lines of Massachusetts childcare, you actually already prevented tons of COVID transmission. Now vaccine is going to be one of the other items showcased here. Just one additional belt, suspenders, knickerbockers, pants, shoes, socks that we use to protect against and prevent COVID transmission. So this is the first key things to know. I'm going to head straight to the myths and facts. And this will actually be the source of where I'm going to drive a lot of our information as we start the Q&A. So why don't we start that, Sarah?
Sure thing.
Or whoever's doing the questions.
So I'll be asking the questions, Dr. Schue. The first question is, how effective is a Johnson & Johnson vaccine? And also, if you only get one shot of the other two vaccines instead of 2 or 1 of Johnson & Johnson, which in your opinion is better?
We actually don't really know the answer to that question, because to answer that question perfectly and honestly, we would have had to run simultaneous trials in real time with all 3 vaccines, with monitoring in between every dose, right? So think about the way that the science would be generated. And in fact, what happened was enrollment happened in real time with each of these vaccines in different countries, including the United States, of course. But the Janssen vaccine, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, was a little bit later. More circulating COVID variants were happening around then. And in essence, We don't have the perfect world where we can compare an outcome from the single dose of Johnson & Johnson with a single dose of Pfizer or Moderna. I should also just back up and say to you all, when I went in and I got my vaccine in January, I was not given a choice, nor did I expect a choice. I was honestly just really glad to get any vaccine and to be called in, because remember, you guys know that I also work in the hospital setting as well in clinic with the teens and the young adults that I see on Wednesday afternoons. So when I got called in, I was just told that day we have Moderna, and that's the one I got, and this is my vaccine card. So we're not going to be given a choice. Generally speaking, when you present to a clinic, don't sweat the detail that you cannot control. Which dose are you going to get? It's not going to matter, because this we do know about the vaccines. Every single one of them prevents serious disease and hospitalization. That's the crucial outcome that the FDA asked every vaccine trialist and every company to monitor. What does it do for hospitalization and serious disease? And all of those are upwards of 90+% efficacy, which is extraordinary. I mean, if you think about it, our annual flu vaccine isn't nearly as good. Many of our vaccines in the childhood armamentarium, when you check your kids' immunization records, when they come into your child cares and they have to be vaccine complete, pertussis, forget it. We don't have this much protection against pertussis. It's an extraordinary gift to be given vaccines that are in the 90+% efficacy range against serious disease and hospitalization, which is the crucial outcome. And all three, one dose of the Johnson & Johnson and 2 doses each of the Pfizer and the Moderna, we know for sure are essentially equivalent on that front. Even with the variants circulating now, everybody keeps following all these outcomes after this.
Thank you, Dr. Schue. And the next question is around after getting vaccinated. After getting vaccinated, do you still carry a viral load? Can you still catch COVID? And can you still spread the virus?
Hold on. I want to make sure that we emphasize something Dr. Fayandju definitely emphasized. None of the current generation vaccines are going to give you COVID. So I want to make really certain that you understand that basically every one of them just basically teaches our immune system to fire up an antibody response that protects us against that spike protein that the coronavirus, all coronaviruses carry. So when it does that, in that process, none of the current generation vaccines are actually carrying any true coronavirus. It's just the protein on the outer loops that we're fighting against. So you won't get any viral load from the vaccine itself. What we don't 100% know is if you were to catch COVID and temporarily carry it, even if you're protected against serious disease, could you have a little bit floating around, so much so that you would be transmissible to other people? Those studies are ongoing, and day by day, we rack up more and more information that if you carry it at all, which is surprisingly little of the time, you will carry relatively lower amounts of virus if you're even exposed. Again, it's one piece of the protection: masking, physical distancing, vaccination, everybody in the world trying to cooperate on a tremendous level to fight this pandemic. All of these pieces have to happen, and all of them drive down community viral load, the world's viral load, our planet's viral load.
Thank you.
Dr. Fayandju, was there anything else you would add to that?
Well, Dr. Schue, you are an expert, and communicated so beautifully. I wish that that I could get CME credit for just listening to you, because it is very helpful to kind of put this in such great context. It's true, everything you said is absolutely right. And one thing I will say, just to kind of make sure that we are completely transparent about what we know about the effectiveness, like Dr. Schue said, all 3 agents are highly effective against the worst complications. But if you were to break down overall effects of symptomatic illness, the Johnson & Johnson one is slightly less effective than the other ones. That's just fact. With that being said, it is still incredibly more effective than some of the vaccines we give out every year on a routine basis. If we had only received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine at the end of this process, we would have been popping bottles of champagne because it was that effective. This is a very, very good vaccine. And I will tell you, from administering vaccines today against with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in our centers here in Ohio, there were so many patients of mine who were excited about getting just one shot because they don't like getting stuck with a needle. I don't like getting stuck with a needle more than once. I got the Moderna, I got stuck twice. First dose was, I felt a little achy, but I felt fine. Second dose kind of kicked my butt. And I felt like, Mike Tyson in his prime had been working on my shoulder with his fists. So it's rough. But the second, having just one shot and being done, I think is a real appeal to a lot of folks. And it gives a very high degree of protection, which is all that we're really looking for.
I wish I had a choice. I must confess, I have a needle phobia. I don't have a needle phobia putting in IVs or drawing blood from other people, but man, I don't like it in myself.
I will tell you, when I was a little boy, not to get too off the field, when I was a little boy, I would run away from my doctor screaming. It was actually
yeah, pretty much. And all of us are basically coming back to help all of you.
I gotta remind a little bit, in medical school, I actually volunteered to help my classmates learn how to put IVs in their arms. So that was a quick way
your
to
own veins.
Oh yeah, I got nice big veins, so it's easy to get me.
Yeah, but I would have loved to have the one and done, but I was not given that choice.
Oh, and Dr. Friangio or Dr. Schue, can one of you comment on I think this is an important question we want to address, the piece here. It says, can you still spread COVID after getting vaccinated?
Well, I'll say this, because you are not getting COVID from the vaccine, you're not able to spread COVID because you were vaccinated. That's a very important point to make. Can you still get COVID if you are vaccinated? Yes. While these vaccines are incredibly effective and very, very, very effective, you can still get COVID, which is why the mask wearing is not going to go away overnight. I've really enjoyed, and I think it's a very effective description, our return to normal, and our ability to be done with masks is really going to be predicated and based on lowering infection rates, less hospitalizations. All those things are going to be studied at very local levels, and then broader decisions can be made at the city, county, state, and national level. But you cannot spread COVID after you get from getting the vaccine. The vaccine does not give you COVID, and you will then not be able to spread COVID from there. Can you still get infected? Yes, you can. It becomes a lot less likely. That's why you're going to still need to wear a mask. And we will kind of, like a dimmer light, we'll kind of bring the lights back on a little bit and a little bit at a time as those infection rates start coming down, and the hospitalization rates also start coming down too.
Thank you. What about the risks of the vaccine? Is there any information you can provide specifically with relation to things about allergies, pregnant women, and the vaccine, or any other kinds of concerns people may have around that?
So here I'll jump in and start, at least, because a number of these are the biggest worries and the biggest fears that people have most commonly about these vaccines. So we'll go ahead and use this myths and facts about COVID-19 vaccines, again, from a safe, trusted information website, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And let me just go to the heart of the matter. Will a COVID vaccine, would it be safe for me to get the vaccine if I would like to have a baby one day? That has been one of the hugest myths on the internet, that this could possibly be related to infertility in the future. I think the root of it, many of us were trying to unplumb the root of this crazy myth. And there was this question of whether or not the spike protein was somewhat related to placental antigens or something crazy like that. And people started just making stuff up. And people are susceptible to this because of the fears of COVID. The bottom line is, it's not possible. The mRNA doesn't even survive that long, and we're tackling COVID-specific proteins here. So it's absolutely safe. And in fact, right now, many pregnant women are worried about the very real potential of getting COVID. So they're making a preference choice to protect themselves and their as yet unborn babies and going ahead and getting vaccine. We're learning that it's safe and they are doing perfectly well with this whole process. And certainly there is no connection with infertility. What was the other one that you asked as the first part of that question?
Yeah, specifically, what are the risks of the vaccine was another question.
Mhm. So we don't think there are any long-term risks, but of course, all of this has to be followed long-term. These are relatively new vaccines, although the science is not new. But what we do know is what Dr. Payanju disclosed. And I will tell you, I had the same experience, but I'm 51 years old, and I, in a cohort of individuals, many of us in that age group will, with the second dose, get a bit of fever, low grade, a bit of headache, achy arm, can be quite painful, for a couple of days, about 2 or 3. Most of us take a little bit of ibuprofen in that process because we kind of have to get up and work anyway. So we do that. But there are really no other real side effects. The only people who are really going to have to watch out are people who have had a prior allergic reaction to any one of the components of the vaccine. And you're going to be like, well, who's that? You'll know if that's you. You will have had a prior reaction to a specific vaccine that may have been an allergic reaction. And there are ways to cross-check. Your physicians can cross-check the exact ingredients of any vaccine you may have had a problem with or something you may be allergic to directly against a public listing of the ingredients of each one of these 3 vaccines. And that's what we do when we try to figure out, is it safe to give it to you? Are we going to have to monitor you? We always monitor people about 15 minutes after the shot anyway, but we monitor people who have a prior history of an allergic reaction more closely.
I'll just add one thing to circle back around the fertility question that's come up. I understand where people's fears are coming from. You know, they hear mRNA, that doesn't seem like too far of a jump to DNA, which makes people think about, like, is this somehow, you know, binding into my genome? Am I going to become, you know, a member of the Avengers because of this? No, you are not being injected with super serum or anything like that. You are being injected with something that is very well tolerated. That's pretty boring and ho-hum in the end of the day, but it's incredibly important and effective. And as to the question about about the fertility question, you know, anecdotally, I know many friends, family members, physicians themselves who are pregnant, who are getting vaccinated, who are carrying their pregnancies beautifully. Mom and baby are doing great and feeling great, and having that peace of mind, I think, is really, really a wonderful thing. You know, pregnancy is not a walk in the park. It is fraught with a whole
Oops.
lots and other things like that. And we know that coronavirus infections do lead to a higher degree of blood clot formation. So if my wife were pregnant, or my sister were pregnant, or my cousin were pregnant, in fact, my cousin is pregnant right now, I would want her to get vaccinated as quickly and as soon as possible, because I know I want her to be protected through the duration of this pregnancy and to be okay.
Thank you so much. And another question that came up was about the booster. And I know that in some cases it's 1 or 2 doses, but going forward, if we look past this time of vaccination, and I do believe it looks like we may have, oh, I see. Okay. Going forward, do you have an idea of when the next booster would be, or how that might look in the years to come?
I can start. Do you want me to start?
Go ahead, Dr. Schue.
Sure. I think we don't know the answer to that. A lot has to do with the way the virus is actually shifting and changing, similar to the way flus. We have an annual vaccine for flu. Many people are speculating we may need an annual booster for SARS-CoV-2 variants. I don't actually think that that's known yet. What will matter is the degree of the variation and how much it moves away from the coverage that the current vaccines give us for the spike protein in its formation, and how our antibodies lock onto that and how closely they tug onto each other. And if they are mutating away and no longer fitting as well as lock and key, and we can't prevent quite as much disease, we'll have monitoring and surveillance systems for that. And always, 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 the sentinel people will be the ones who were the amazing people who enrolled in the vaccine trials and will always give us the first signal of potential breakthrough disease. When will that happen? When will we need a booster? In point of fact, when we first roll out vaccines, we never know when a booster will be needed. We've had some amazing stories, right? With things like HPV vaccination, the vaccine against cervical cancer and genital warts, drawing from my STD world, of course. So that has been an extraordinary journey with, again, another vaccine that's 90+% efficacious, works against the stuff that we want it to work against. How long would the immunity last? It turns out it's now been since 2006, since the proof of principle studies on that issue. And those first trial populations are yet to develop breakthrough disease. And yes, they're still being monitored. Some of these people are still being monitored in cohorts, surveillance cohorts. And that's how dedicated the scientists are to this kind of thing. And that's how we'll know when we'll need another dose. Other thoughts?
If I just wanted to just, put some, first of all, thank you for that wonderful answer. And also just to, highlight the fact that historically vaccines are probably one of the most significant medical innovations we have. I prescribe medicines to patients all day for diabetes and heart disease and a whole host of other ailments, but I also administer vaccines, pneumococcal vaccine, flu vaccines. When we look at what vaccines have done historically since the first vaccine, which was against smallpox in 1798, by administering vaccines, we have saved millions, if not billions of people's lives over the last several centuries, and we continue to improve the technology. The HPV vaccine is so important. I'm so glad Dr. Schue brought that up. Like all these vaccines do such wonderful things to prevent preventable diseases that can really impact people's lives. So I hope, if nothing else, we can really, make this a great conversation about getting people to know the facts about vaccine and about how important they are to our armory against disease.
It's true. It's a total overall effort. Mm-hmm. And it's that short-term pain for long-term gain, right? Mm-hmm. It's this idea that really, as you're teaching the immune system, if you are the lucky person to feel like you got kicked in the shoulder or Mike Tyson hit you, basically that's a sign that you're actually firing up a tremendous immune response. Not to say that if you don't get that sign, you have to be ultra worried that you didn't fire up enough antibody. But if you can flip it, turn it, and reverse it, and say to yourself, okay, short-term pain, long-term gain, this is going to work. Maybe I'll get that much closer to seeing my loved ones, hugging them, being a little bit closer to them. It's worth it. It's worth it based on what we know now, and you can never go backwards. You can't go backwards and have regrets. You must base on current available accurate information from trusted people and trusted websites. You can't go back. No regrets.
Thank you both. The following questions around the records and medical records. Do we anticipate that the state will require a vaccine record? How do we navigate, this is a separate question, so I'll let you answer that. But the following question, just so you know, is how do we navigate parent questions about which teachers are vaccinated and the HIPAA and privacy policies?
I'll start because many of you are from Massachusetts. And this is actually something that when you Google search Massachusetts COVID vaccine frequently asked questions, which I'll pull up now and share, this is actually one of the questions that's on our website right now. So the tracking is within the Massachusetts MIIS. It's the Information on Immunizations system statewide. And we actually do know who got vaccine, which lot numbers, et cetera. This is partly for safety issues. We want to be able to track this information. And of course, for surveillance issues. And of course, we're investigating inequities in vaccine distribution this way too. All of these data are going to contribute towards that. These data are not public. Like they don't post who got vaccine and who didn't get vaccine. But, and I think it's important to realize that the state, at least in Massachusetts, and I really don't think any place, well, I shouldn't say, we cannot say, we are not going to require people to do this. You have to do what you feel comfortable with, okay? So we're not going to require hospital workers. We're not going to require teachers to get the vaccine. That is not what's going to be done. I wonder if the world is going to turn out to something like the following. At least as a frontline hospital and clinic worker, if I choose not to get flu vaccine, what happens to me is in order to protect my patients from my exhalations, basically, my hospital requires me to wear a mask if I choose not to get the annual flu vaccine. I've never done that, so I traditionally don't wear a mask in the hospital, but I wonder if the error will come when a similar approach may happen with coronavirus in hospitals. That I could envision happening in hospitals. Since we've never had precedent before to this degree in early childhood teachers, K through 12 teachers, educators, I'm not sure where we're going to go with policy there, but I'll tell you one thing, protected health information is protected. It's yours, and it is still your body, your choice to get these vaccines.
Absolutely. And your employer cannot look that up. They have no right to look that up for you. They cannot access that information. In our practices with Oak Street Health, we are strongly encouraging everyone to get vaccinated. We're vaccinating our staff if they would like to be vaccinated, but we also recognize that it is your body, your choice. We want to make sure that people are informed and they can make an informed decision. Ultimately, that's the most important thing. We want to make sure that you're privy to all of the most up-to-date research, all of the facts. I'm so glad Dr. Schue is bringing us so many great websites that show where you can get real information, not stuff from WhatsApp, not from that uncle of yours who always seems to send all those kooky emails. Don't listen to those folks. Let's listen to the folks who have spent their collective, let's trust the collective knowledge of thousands of scientists and doctors who know what they're talking about. We know this is safe, but at the end of the day, if someone does make the choice and decides not to be vaccinated, that is not information that the public would be able to pull up.
So yes, I completely agree. And I like your stories about the trusted uncle. I get a lot of those texts.
Oh, yes.
All of us who have friends and family.
We all have that. We all have that person.
This is great. So what I just did was I actually just used a trick that I've used this entire pandemic. These websites are enormous. And come on, guys, we're also learning in real time about these things with you, okay? So what do I do when I'm looking for, is there a record of the vaccine that I'm getting? So on this website, Massachusetts COVID Vaccines Frequently Asked Questions, I just use the Control F on my Windows computer. I searched the word record, and there it was. Boom. Is a patient's vaccination record protected from disclosure? Yes. Confidential, like a medical record. Will the COVID vaccine be mandatory? No. Voluntary program. It's in blue and white. No, black and white, something like that.
Thank you.
We're definitely traipsing, I think, into interesting territory because we don't have precedent. Just like Dr. Schue said, we do not have precedent at this point. There are some who are anticipating that some countries may require a vaccine record for admission into that country. For instance, this morning, the Netherlands became the first country in the European Union to institute travel restrictions or travel allowances based on a person's immunity status and their vaccine status. Whether or not that's something that could be effectively utilized in the United States, given our constitutional norms and our civil liberties, that remains to be seen. But that is something that internationally and nationally we're going to have to contend with as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, that these are very country specific and also very culture specific, right? In many ways, even state to state, there may be variants in the future. And the key there, I think, is this tension between individual liberty and individual choice with public health, and the growing knowledge that to reduce community viral load, more people do need to be vaccinated, right? But yet we in this country are firm believers in individual rights. And so that tension is there, we recognize it, and it will be balanced, likely state by state. But on balance, even if there's no precedent, you realize that we live in the United States of America, and my parents emigrated to the United States of America for a reason, for that choice, for that individual level of freedom that you might not get necessarily elsewhere. You may have to do trade-offs. You want to go to the Netherlands, maybe you'll have to make a different choice, right? But these are on balance, general things that our culture does really well, choice.
Thank you both. I agree that the resources are so important, and we will be sharing this out as well, the links for all of this tomorrow, along with the recording. And as we are getting closer to 7:30, there's a few more questions coming in. I just want to be able to ask those as well. What are the big question here, as we have educators on the call tonight, is around what are the risk levels of fully vaccinated adult educators passing the virus among groups of unvaccinated young children, questions about testing. Really, I think what educators are trying to understand, Dr. Schue and Dr. Fayandju, is how this vaccination will impact what it looks like in the centers right now, along with, in terms of spreading the virus to the children, having to get tested and quarantining, and all of that has been coming up a lot.
I'll take first gander at answering this question, and then get Dr. Fayandju to help with his perspective from another state as well, which is so helpful. I think it's still a little bit hard to predict. We want to see more of this interaction between variant development by the virus and ongoing efforts to really ramp up vaccination to the point where we might get maybe 60, 70, 80% of the population in Massachusetts, at least the adult population, fully vaccinated before the summer, even possibly. So we want to see these interactions in real time before we make real-time decisions based on hard science about what we should do with infection prevention within the childcare setting. Right now, right, people trying to be distant as possible, still a good idea, still indoors. This is Massachusetts spring, which means that one day you get 60 degrees and the other day you get 20. So we're still indoors. We still want to fight with the idea that fresh air is good, circulating air is good, and we still want to mask up and use goggles when diaper changing and things like that, face shields for splash protection. So for now, hang on to your hats, hang on to your belts, suspenders, hand washing, hygiene, don't touch your face, all of that for now. For a few more weeks, months, while we accrue the evidence that tells us whether or not we can drop one component of that, maybe half a component of one, maybe a little bit more of this and that, okay? It will evolve and we will have more guidance to come. And again, the things we've asked all along, patience. Dr. Fayandju, any perspective from your vantage point?
Yeah, I mean, I think here in Ohio and throughout the Midwest, I think a similar tact will be taken. You know, we know how important it is for children to be in educational settings with early childhood educators in K through 12 as well. But we cannot kind of just throw caution to the wind and not let the science drive our decisions. What I would say too is that you are all part of this effort. You, each and every one of you, have power and agency in this moment to help us understand the vaccines and understand the virus better by sharing symptoms when you have them. I know, for instance, here in my company at Oak Street Health, when I start my day, I have to send my symptoms to an app that goes into a little decision tree. And if I answer yes to any question that may be suspicious, it will give me a red dot and say a red circle with an X and say stay home. And you know, that sort of thing I think will be helpful for us to have more widely available. Tools like that will be very helpful. I'm very excited about more rapid testing being available at people's homes, so people can get tested in the similar way that they would test to see if they were pregnant or not. You know, everybody kind of spit in a cup at the start of the day. If anybody comes back positive from COVID, you know, maybe you go in and get a more sensitive PCR test to determine whether or not you in fact have the virus, if you don't have any risk factors. This kind of calibration and kind of, you know, working smart while also working hard at this, I think is going to really be the most effective way for us to keep you all safe and keep the virus at bay.
I do think, though, it's caused me to reflect many times, Dr. Fayanju, about how, you know, we were just born to work. Most of us in healthcare and early childcare would just go in and work through a cold.
Yep.
That, my sense is, those days may be numbered in a
And
significant way.
And you know what? That's a good thing. That is a good thing. You know, from you know, I can remember as a resident and early in my career, you know, coming in to work feeling like warmed over garbage and just saying, you know, I can tough it out. I can tough it out. I can still remember my residency director when I was a chief resident, and I wanted to come in with a fever of 101, and she was like, "Go home right now. I'm sending you Tamiflu." I had the flu, and she sent me home, and she said, never again. She's like, promise me for the rest of your career, if you're ever sick, you will never come to work. You are doing yourself and your patients no favors by doing that.
That's right. Because rest does get you better, no matter what illness you have. And it is true. We had this idea that we should work short of vomiting or actively having to sit on a toilet or having a terrible fever. And I think those days are numbered if I had to guess and get out my crystal ball. We don't know that for a fact, okay? EEC guidance is still yet to come to change, and DPH guidance is still to come. But I think on balance, the goal will always be now for the future that we try not to infect others, and we are most likely most infectious when we are symptomatic ourselves, and we really shouldn't be working.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you both, Dr. Schue and Dr. Fayanju. We are so grateful for your expertise. I learned so much tonight. I know that all of the educators who joined us this evening did as well. And I want to thank Aaron Chapman and Beenal Patel on the Neighborhood Villages side, who made this all happen so seamlessly and beautifully. And wishing you all health. And I hope that you have a great rest of your night. And thank you so much for joining us. The recording will be available on our website, and we will send the websites you saw tonight on the screen in the follow-up email.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for the chance to help and to spread the word and to get information out there. Dr. Schue, thank you so much. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.